I'm Vicki Halper, and I'm the curator of Richard Marquis Keepers. This is a retrospective of the work of a very famous glass artist. A retrospective means work from his entire career, from when he was a student in college in the 60s until recently. It's a great honor for an artist to have this kind of show. One of the interesting things about this collection is that it was all in the artist's possession. From the time he started work as an artist, he collected his own work and saved it. That's why the show is called Keepers. These works are special to Dick, and it makes the job of a curator and a museum much easier because everything was boxed and labeled in one place with one lender. At the beginning of the show, there are 3 pieces that sort of give an overview of his work. This piece of Richard's was done in 1970 and was included in a very important exhibition called Objects USA. It was the Johnson's Wax collection. For that time, this piece was extremely advanced, although it looks somewhat crude to us today. Because the studio glass movement was less than 10 years old, Dick Marquis was one of the most accomplished glass blowers at that period. Venus de Marquis from the 70s is like an encyclopedia of Dick Marquis's work. Notice that the objects in the piece are stacked one on top of the other. The bottom pieces are blown, and the top piece, which is a knick-knack of the Venus de Milo, is attached to the top. This combination of blown glass and found object is a major quality of Dick's work. On the surface of this piece are tiny little discs or tiles of patterned glass. These are called marine. Dick was a master of the marine, and these patterns are made from a complicated combination of colored glass, which is then stretched like taffy and sliced crosswise, making these little squares, sort of covering and unifying this stacked piece with a found cheap object on top, contrasting with a hugely technical work that goes into the sculpture itself. Dick was an artist in residence at the Waterford Company in Ireland. Waterford makes crystal, mostly colorless. Dick, as you can see from the Venus, was enamored with color. But even so, he made this beautiful piece that combines 2 crystal dogs that were picked up from the Waterford bins, they're found objects, a blown base, and a beautiful stacked column in the middle that is made of little bricks of glass that are fused together. Dick went to Venice and learned Venetian techniques, including those little patterned marine in 1970. He was the second American to go to Venice to learn Venetian techniques of glass blowing, but the first artist who worked on the floor with the artisans who were following the directions of designers. In 1972, Dick was getting his master's degree in glass, and for his master's degree thesis project, he decided to use marine in a unique way, making letters for each word of the Lord's Prayer, stretching the marine and cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces until, like Ripley's Believe It or Not, Dick had the Lord's Prayer on the head of a pin. Here in the case, you see various sizes of the whole Lord's Prayer, each made from a different stretching of the glass. Each letter was a marina. Each word was a combination, and each line was a fusing of the different letters until Dick had the whole Lord's Prayer. As he was doing this, word got around the country that this remarkable technical feat was being accomplished in California, and the audience grew and grew for Dick's production. At the end, he had the tiniest piece of glass with the Lord's Prayer completely on it. He sent a copy to one of his friends who thought the envelope was empty, and when he realized what was in the envelope, he raced to get a microscope and look to see the Lord's Prayer. This is probably the most complicated marina ever done in the history of glassmaking. Dick is a technical genius with a remarkable sense of humor. He uses the humor to undercut the seriousness of glass and glass blowing, and maybe of art in general. Dick is a fan of Monty Python's humor that was British in the 70s. One of his favorite segments of the BBC program, Monty Python's Flying Circus, was about the society for putting things on top of other things. So this tension between technical brilliance and humor occurs in all his work. Here we have a stacked piece. Remember, we talked about that with Venus de Marquis. And the piece has a little vase on the lower part that is Dick's remaking of an ancient Egyptian technique. This little vase with the yellow handles could have been made 1,500 years ago. On either side of the vase are two blown pieces, and at the top, a little found knickknack, a Shriner's duck. That is a duck with the hat of a Shriner. That's about the same size as the vase underneath. So what we have is a pattern that's like dot, dash, with equal long parts and short parts, and the whole stacking is slightly askew, giving the piece a tension and a humor that is unexpected. This occurs again and again in Dick's work. His undercutting of the brilliance of the process with the humor and the attention to detail, to scale, and to color between what he finds in a jug store and what he makes in the studio. Dick loves dogs. This is a piece that hangs in his kitchen. It's a very simple appearing line drawing of the head of a dog. And yet it's one of the most complicated technical pieces because the black line is glass inlaid in white glass. Dick says of this piece, it is less than the sum of its parts. Dick organizes his pieces by stacking, and he also organizes them by putting them on shelving. He's a collector, and the objects he collects generally are not valuable or not when he bought them, And they show up in his work all the time as knickknacks or found objects. In this piece, Dick has highlighted his collection of shaving brushes. They're all about the same height. It's a little like a Where's Waldo, because among the shaving brushes is a very technically beautiful teapot. And you have to find the teapot. And then you have to find the Mr. Peanut that is also the same size as the shaving brushes. This is a kind of stacking something on top of something else that uses a beautiful organizational method to focus your attention. 10 years later, in 2003, Dick made this Shmoo sample box. Now, the Shmoo is a cartoon character that was created by Al Capp, a sort of formless, shapeless blob of an animal-like creature. Dick took this form and translated it into a complex series of clear glass shapes. In other words, instead of a cheap knockoff of an expensive object, he did an expensive knockoff of a very cheap object. The back of this box is a paint-by-numbers painting, which doesn't seem to have any direct relationship to the Shmoo objects in the front, but unites the piece with a scenic background. Like most of the first generation of studio glass artists, Dick started as a potter. He kept the forms that ceramic artists had been using for millennia, like the goblet and the teapot, and he translated them into glass, making objects that had been useful, functional at one point, into objects that were just beautiful for their form alone. Now, the teapot is kind of a difficult but funny shape. The spout, the handle, if you look at histories of teapot forms, many are jokes, and they seem to be almost like dogs, maybe, going somewhere. So this case has a history of some of Dick's teapots, starting in the 70s and going until a much later period, recently, in fact. Many of the teapots are made from marine, those little tiles that are fused together, rolled up on a bubble of glass, and blown. So the patchwork quilt patterns that come out in a lot of Dick's work are started with that technique of patterned and pulled glass, fused and then blown. You can see that he got better and better at this technique, or more and more precise at this technique as the years passed. On the top in the middle is a patchwork teapot that he made in the 70s in Australia. And at the bottom, you see the crispness and clarity of a later piece. On the right, you see marvelous marine as little silhouetted animals and red, white, and blue glass. Dick collects metal granite ware, a form of American folk utilitarian ware. In this piece, he includes an actual metal utilitarian pot on the top of two pieces of stacked blown glass that mimic the color and pattern of granite ware. He makes that pattern by a specific use of his marine. and the contrast between the functional and the non-functional, the sculptural and the utilitarian, and the unification by pattern and color is a beautiful example of Dick's style, strictness, and humor. Dick is known for his collaboration with the artist Dante Marioni on these teapot goblets, a sort of beautiful and ridiculous form that combines a useful cup at the top and a completely useless tiny teapot as the stem of a goblet. The collaboration was started at Dante's suggestion. Dante, a master of Venetian goblet technique, and Dick, a master of miniature teapots. Dick made these pieces in honor of the Italian designer Carlo Scarpa, who used marine and color to make fused and slumped forms. Part of the work is marine that are fused together and slumped in a curved dish, and part are marine that are rolled onto glass and blown. The designs are very complex, and one of the big problems in working this way is that the different colors of glass are not necessarily compatible. Different colors of glass are not easy to put together. They melt at different temperatures, and they have different properties. And the loss is very high in combining the different colors of glass together. Because of this, Dick eventually changed the kind of glass he used, which became easier to work with and had much less loss. When Dick changed the kind of glass he was using to a glass that's manufactured in Portland by the Bullseye Company, he finally had a product in which all the colors were compatible and breakage stopped, and he could include more color and more complicated design in his work, both blown and fused. In this piece, at the bottom, there is a slab construction made of fused pieces of glass. The slab construction comes from ceramics, like so much of what Dick was doing throughout his career. By making slabs and then fusing them together in three-dimensional shapes, he had an entirely new way of working with glass. On top of what he calls a cake are marine that are blown into the shape of a duck, facing in one direction, many colors, all combined, and on top of the duck is a knick-knack of a setter. Dick's love of dogs, his sense of direction, the symmetry with an offset of non-symmetry are very important to his work. Dick made the house standing on the platform in 2004. It's almost minimalist in its rigor and beautiful in its color, and made with the slab technique that he had developed after starting to use bullseye glass. In 2014, his house burned down, and he added the flames on top of this household form. He closed his studio at that time for blowing and has really not blown glass since. This is the last piece in the exhibition, the most recent, and it uses things that Dick had around in his studio that he combined. A beautiful blown elephant carrying a vase. The elephant and the duck are both blown pieces, and they're both about the same scale. Something that Dick often does, which is confuse the monumental with the tiny and put them together. Dick has a collection of books from the mid-19th century. Dick's Works was an alternate title to the exhibition. Inside the books that Dick has collected are articles on science, religion, damnation, philosophy, including subjects such as the effects of universal falsehood and future misery of the wicked. This sense of age, the relation of the author, Mr. Dick, to Dick Marquis, and the use of these beautiful fabricated objects as bookends is an epitome of Dick's work and the reason we love it so much.